Hello, my gorgeous sweetie darlings. Thank you very much for joining me once again. This video is dedicated to all of my law student viewers. I've been asked to do some exam advice. I will put it out here, like right now, I am not the best student. So it's been a struggle for me because I'm like last minute procrastination queen, and I've learned the hard way that you cannot do that on the LPC or the bar. I'm on the LLM LPC. I've got a little more work than regular LPC students, but anyway, I wanted to give you some advice on what I've been doing, especially as a student that doesn't have the best habits. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys what has worked for me so far after trial and error of different ways of learning. I'm very visual and audio, so when I can, I will like read out my notes, play them back to myself where I can hear them. Sometimes I fall asleep listening to them. I've had a few tutors in the past help me learn some areas where I found very difficult and challenging. I highly recommend, for those of you who are doing distance learning or studying the bar or the LPC online. I don't know if they do the bar online, but if you're studying any kind of these law postgrad, law professional like practice courses, if you're doing the LPC abroad or online distance learning, I highly recommend that you hire a tutor, especially for those subjects that you find extremely challenging. I will recommend a tutor company below in the description box and in the comments box. They have helped me exponentially, and it's good because if you are a distance learner or online learner, you don't have actual lectures or classes to go to, so you are at a huge disadvantage, especially when it comes to these topics, because it's procedural, it's practical, like it's so different from the LLB. It's so different from academia. So having a teacher for the first time just holding your hand and walking you through things. I didn't have tutors for every subject. That would have been insanely expensive. But the Bloomsbury law tutors are excellent, very pricey, but I'd say worth every penny. Okay, so because I'm visual, writing my notes in Sharpie on huge pieces of paper gets into my head a lot better than when I write them on lined paper. Word diagramming, thanks to one of my favorite lecturers of all time from City Law School, the University of London. She recommended diagramming. I'll link her video below as well because I found it so helpful the time I was on the bar. For LPC bar students, any law student really, diagramming is amazing. So ever since I saw her video, I've been doing that, and it helps. Just to visually, it's hard to do like proper like graphic diagrams for law because all we do is words, statutory legislation, provisions, things, but just to do the kind of like break it down, even though it's all words still, it's still kind of breaking it down into a diagram form. Even though the chunks of words, they're kind of easier to digest when you do them like this. I try to bullet point as much as possible, and I just try to set out each concept in their own little area. Competition law stuff right here. We've got the Vertical Agreements Block Exemption Order, which is VABIO. This is the one for the UK. The VBER is the one for the EU, which was formerly VRBE. Yes, VBRE. But both VABIO and VIBA are basically nearly identical. Your new books, if you're doing competition, are going to reflect that. Often when it just drives me insane, but I'm kind of used to it now. Every time they refer to things like that, they're like, Article 1011 TFEU / Chapter 1 Prohibition, Section whatever of the Competition Act 1998. They'll always group them to reference them together, and you end up just getting really used to them being grouped together because they're so similar. They're nearly identical. There's a few differences when it comes to like sanctions and who can do what. Like the EU can't do criminal sanctions for UK companies, whatever. The competition markets authorities that can only do criminal sanctions for UK companies. So And the CMA is the competition authorities for the UK. But anyway, I learned the difference between what the commission can do and what the CMA can do. And then you learn a bit about the Sherman Act, Clayton Act of the US. So with competition, you kind of dip into like all three. US is at the bottom, but you're learning EU and UK together. They tried to keep the UK provisions very similar because it makes less room for ambiguity, and it makes things more uniform and easier to deal with, especially UK companies that have EU effect and they have, you know, distributors in Europe and this and that. It's just to keep everything more uniform, and because if they're too different, it's going to be very, very difficult to legally deal with. So merger control, oh my god, this is competition again. These are my competition notes mainly. Article 101 A to E list, directly, indirectly fixed purchase selling prices. Ooh, these look like object infringements, hardcore restrictions, naughty. You can be put in the slammer for 5 years if you've been caught with a hardcore restriction. No exemption for you. Competition law and IP. Fun! Oh yeah, you've got an intellectual property section of competition. Some overlapping. I decided to do competition, commercial, and IP. All international. So fun but not fun, you know? You know what I mean? Love, hate. Law students will get it. But large pieces of paper help me a lot. It's good to stick them all over your walls everywhere in the house, so you just like run into them. Coming out of the toilet and you're like, oh right, Article 102, right. So that helps me. This may not be for everyone, but it really, okay. Sticky notes are your friend. Why? Because especially during exams, they are open book. Do not let that fool you. Coming from a double law degree background, I've done my LLB and my GDL, which are both closed book. Open book is way harder than closed book. And that's another thing that kind of screwed me over, is that I was thinking in the beginning, oh, open book, it's going to be easy. I'll be able to just look it up and, you know, the book is here. And it's no. You have to study completely differently. Your brain has to, it's like a different kind of skill, these exams. It's not, you can't study or do the exams in the same way at all that you did the academic LLB exams. They're totally a different animal, and they are so much more difficult. I just can't explain it. They are so much more difficult than in closed book. Closed book exams, you kind of know what you're going to study. You just got to memorize a whole bunch of shit and just regurgitate it all and know everything, but it's all memorization. With these topics, it's not about memorization. If you don't know your stuff, all the notes in the world and all the books in the world, even if you have the internet during an exam, which is totally not allowed, you have a lockdown browser, your screen is recorded, you are recorded, your whole room, you have to do a 360. It's really strict. So you absolutely cannot use anything outside of your textbook and a few notes. But all the notes in the world, and I'm saying even if you hypothetically could have Google during an exam, you'd be screwed. Because if you don't know what you're doing with the information, you're going to sit there and you're going to keep reading, and you're going to fail the exam, which happened to me a few times. So that's why I'm doing resits. I learned the hard way. So I now know I'm very nervous when it comes to these exams. Open book means more difficult. So sticky notes are your best friend. So you can turn to reference. The book doesn't give you the answers on how to do the exam. You have to know procedure. And the only way you learn procedure is going through the workshops and sitting down and bloody learning it. The answers aren't just there for you to read or learn from. You have to know by practice of what to do with the information, apply it, and then apply law. Law is the background on this course. Even though it is postgrad, like a law practice course, it's the procedure and how we advise clients and applying the right rules, and then case law, legislation, the right provisions. And on top of that, knowing the difference between what is commercially sound advice and what is legally sound advice, because what is legally sound advice isn't always the most commercially sound advice, especially when you're doing commercial questions, or especially with businesses. So anyway, to have quick reference, books are there for, like, you forget a rule, like, oh, what is that rule again? Then you can look and be like, okay. But if you don't know anything about how the rule applies, or you don't even know what rule to look for because you didn't study, then this isn't going to help you. I nearly spent a whole exam reading because I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't familiar with the content because I was trying to do too many exams in 1 month, and I was hyper focused on some and totally ignored the others, causing me to fail like half my exams in a month in one term. So I had to do research. Anyway, this is the kind of thing which I write on a paper, like a sticky note. So yes, so you have Article 101 and 102 of the TFEU, and then I'll put them numbered, like 1, prohibited list, 2, automatically void, 3, exceptions, and then it will refer to the paragraphs here. This is the legislation in the back of the book. So having your books and notes is quick reference. You rarely actually look at them during the exam. They are there to reference for a few seconds so you can insert them into your argument, which is all going to be coming from here. You'll have a binder, usually an A4 binder. I'm in America right now, so I just have a normal three ring binder, and A4 is longer, but you're allowed one binder. I have dividers in there. I will divide them up for, like, 1, you can have just like notes, like regular notes. 2, structure. If you don't have a structure, you're going to fail. You need to create your own exam structure. Your exam answers are going to have fluidity. They're easy to follow for the marker. Statutory stuff, case law stuff. So you can divide them up however helps you during the exam. But remember, you don't want to be looking at your papers and your books, because the more you do that, the less time you're putting into these questions. The exam is so dense. There's a lot of questions and you only get 3 hours. For a law exam, 3 hours isn't all that much. Most law exams are like 4. So 3 hours, and you pretty much need most of that time dedicated to writing. So you don't want to be looking at your notes or papers too often unless you forgot some obscure provision or case law and you did quickly reference it to just insert it into your exam. So you don't want to be learning and trying to search for what you think is the answer in these, because this isn't going to help you. So this is part of LPC Answered. LPC Answered can help. I wouldn't recommend relying on it alone because it doesn't make much sense if you don't actually study. They give you guidance to break things down on how to get through some workshops and how to analyze and advise clients. So they'll give you some structures, but it's very bare bones. It's only really good to kind of organize it all in your head once you already know everything. But I found LPC Answered not to be, as your primary source, it's not enough. You're not going to understand what to do with it if you don't really know your foundation. It's good once you already know your foundation. So that's what I'll say. So here's another thing I did. So this was just kind of like a little guidance for split topics up into their own sections: vertical agreements, horizontal agreements, mergers, enforcement, leniency, intellectual property, and then abuse of dominance. Those are all the main core topics of the competition subject. And then I said for each heading, have a structure, then legislation, then case law. So if you don't know your shit, you're not going to know what to do with any of this. And you can have all the books in the world about all of these topics, and you're not going to know what to do with them if you haven't really studied and learned everything. Because you can have your problem questions on any number or combination of any of these things. For this exam, our main questions: horizontal agreements, vertical agreements, which is a distribution agreement, and the rest, like the multiple choice questions, were mergers, enforcement, leniency, IP. Oh, and then one of the other problem questions was abusive dominance. Those are large topics. Vertical, horizontal, and abusive dominance are always going to be like main core topics that you should know. And then you'll never know if you'll have problem questions on the other things. But another thing that I had to learn the hard way was to study broadly. During the LLB, you're able to kind of hyper focus on certain subjects because you kind of know what's going to, you don't know exactly what kind of questions are going to be on the exam, but you have a general idea of like the topics that you need to know. But like on the LPC or the bar exam, they don't tell you which ones are going to be MCQ, multiple choice questions, which ones are going to be the main problem questions. I had made the mistake of using my workshops thinking that the exam was going to heavily reflect the workshops, and sometimes it's not the case. Actually, you never know when it's going to be or when it's not going to be. Don't rely on your workshops to reflect the exam. Maybe there'll be some similarities, but don't ever do that. When I came to the exam, they had the most heavily weighted, with the most marks, obscure topics that weren't really focused on in the workshops, and that's where my shortcoming, my downfall was. So you need to study really broadly for these topics. Get to know all of the topics inside and out, because you never know. And I have to also say, even if questions don't have that much weight, the multiple choice questions are kind of like a trap. They can be really terrifying because they can totally end you during an exam. Multiple choice questions are worth two marks each, but altogether they'll be worth 20 to 30 marks. That's a lot. But if you haven't studied broadly enough, they're going to be mini daggers, and each one of them is going to stab you one at a time. It puts more pressure on you to absolutely ace the other questions, do perfectly on the other questions, which is very rare. You have more of a chance of passing an exam completing all the questions mediocre than acing half of the questions. If you leave anything blank, or if you consistently don't hit the marks, or you're relevant, or you get half the multiple choice questions wrong, because they accumulate, even though you're like, oh, it's only 2 marks each, you can't just rack up your points on a multiple choice question. You're either right or you're wrong. People think, oh, multiple choice is going to be easy. No. On the LPC and the bar, they'll sometimes give you like 4 correct answers, and you have to choose the most correct according to the exact information given. And sometimes you're not going to remember every single little detail. Sometimes the questions are identical, and it will be a matter of the difference between may, must, can. And then you have to assess it to that situation. For like some answers will be right if the situation was slightly different from the situation they gave you. So it's like that. You really need to be so careful, because the MCQs try to confuse you. I know it sounds really wrong, but I feel like they're trying to test how keen you are with the details, because as a lawyer you have to be meticulous. You have to have that skill of pointing out even the smallest little minute discrepancy, incorrect little detail. So you have to really watch out. When I did my last exam, I studied so broadly, and you have to go into study mode with the mindset that all of the topics, any of them can come up as a large problem question. Any of them. Even if they come up as small multiple choice questions, like for example, mergers, my last competition exam, mergers was not a problem question. They had a few multiple choice questions on it. But I studied for that topic as if they were going to have one because I didn't know. I had no idea. But I was happy I studied thoroughly because I was able to answer the multiple choice questions quite swiftly. If you don't study broadly enough, you're going to spend, I have spent 20 minutes to 30 minutes on one multiple choice question. These aren't just small questions sometimes. Some of the LPC multiple choice questions are long, huge paragraphs, takes you ages to just even get through. And that's another thing they test you on. They're going to give you a whole bunch of irrelevant information just to see if you can spot the salient points so you can answer the question properly. So you have to know, you have to have an eagle eye as a lawyer to just look at something and see what's relevant, see what's not relevant, see what's garbage and see what's important. See what you need, see what you don't need. You have to be able to sift through the trash and get the important stuff out as quickly as possible in a very short period of time. So if you don't study broadly enough, the MCQs can kill you. Yeah, they're only 2 points, but my God, they add up. That could be a matter of pass or fail for you. They all contribute to your mark. So I failed one of the exams last year because I had selectively studied. I just assumed if I do really, really well in these few subjects, which I probably think are going to be the large problem questions, then I'll end up passing the exam because I do so perfectly in those, and I'm able to just hyper focus and be really good at a few. You can't do that. My feedback for that exam, she said I scored really high on the problem questions that I did do. But I put all my eggs into those questions that my time management, that's the one thing that I struggle with the most when it comes to my exams. Time management was the biggest problem I had. I'm a fast typer, but I will spend so much time on a question fleshing it out. I want to do as much detail as possible. I want to answer it as perfectly as I can. Or sometimes I didn't study broadly enough. So I had to really just do as much as I could for the questions that I did know. But the thing is, I skipped a few questions because I didn't know them all that well, and I thought I could just rack up the points just doing the other ones really well, but it doesn't work like that. You skip questions, you're totally throwing away 25 marks, and you cannot just get more marks than they're allowed to give you for the other questions. You can't just make it up through the other questions. You really, it's so reliant on you answering everything. So even the smaller questions that are worth like 4 to 7 points, 10 points, 12 points, like try to do them all as detailed as possible. And what I found helpful, which is really, really weird, is working backwards. For some reason, psychologically, if I work backwards and then I jump back and forth and then meet in the middle, I close it all out. I get everything done. I find it so detrimental to just do one question at a time chronologically, not looking ahead, just working one thing at a time. And I used to do that, and it screwed me up every single time. So what I do now is when I open the exam, I scroll through all the questions from the beginning to the end. And then from the end, I will really look at the questions and start writing down which area of law this belongs to, what kind of thing you're going to have to be dealing with, just to do a little intro into everything. Because during an exam, your mind is different. Your mind is racing. Your heartbeat's racing. You're completely high on adrenaline, and you're completely in fear mode. And I noticed that it's better for me. So you just skim through all the questions and just kind of familiarize yourself with everything. Then I would do the first 5 MCQ questions, and then I would start from the last question, as long as it doesn't pertain to, like, sometimes the last question is a spin-off from the questions before. So even if it does that, like, do like a question in the middle, like, as long as you don't need to do it in chronological order. I noticed that jumping back and forth really helps you finish an exam, because if you do everything chronologically, you're going to be stuck on one thing, and then in your mind you're like, I can't move on to the next. Because I used to be like that. I'm like really perfectionist in some ways when it comes to my work, and I can't start something unless I finish something. And you cannot have that mentality during a law exam. You have to be able to start and then stop in the middle, go to another question, stop in the middle, go to another question, and back and forth, and flesh it all out at the end and finish everything up. Because you have to make sure that you are answering every single question. Leaving questions blank on these exams can kill you. They can fail you because you are just throwing the opportunity away. And there's no other way to rack up your points. I hope I've been able to help some of you at least. And if you have any questions whatsoever, any details, anything you want me to elaborate on, please do leave your questions and queries in the comment box below. I read them all. And I hope you have learned something from this. And good luck with your exams. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.
I found these index cards to be quite useful for the LPC, for mainly MCQ questions, and to just have knowledge, have a foundation behind them. So you'll see I'll have a Competition Act 1998, and then it will just have like a quick explanation on the back, because often they will, on MCQs, they will just ask you like if you know the difference between like 4 or 5 provisions. So it's good to kind of memorize the provisions so you don't have to like spend any time searching for them in a textbook. So, and then I'll have like, if you look at the just multiple choice test questions, like practice tests on the elite, it's just good to know these terms, because within a multiple choice question, even a really long one, just having these like simple terms memorized will help you exponentially and just get you through questions a lot easier, a lot quicker. So just kind of having quick knowledge. Some are very basic things, but it's just good to know these things. Like, how would an economist describe the competitive nature between business offering lower prices to gain customers? So I actually put actual MCQs that were on the practice questions on here, just so I kind of get an idea, get to know. Sometimes the exam won't have many that are similar to the practice ones online. The practice ones online are very basic and very, very bare bones, really. But the MCQs on the exam are quite detailed, and like I said, some of them can be very long and full of things to confuse you. So just kind of getting to know the basis on things and being very familiar with even what can seem very basic. Like, what type of vertical agreement allows the supplier to stipulate the type of retailer that can be supplied? How does the Commission collect evidence? State the consequences of breaching Article 101 and 102. See, these can also help you with problem questions. In the index cards, I just, especially obscure, like, what are commitments? What is a settlement agreement? What are some rights of defense? What are some rights of third parties? What is the Competition Market Authority? So even though like you know what this CMA is, it's good to know like the details of them, exactly what they do, because sometimes you forget small little details and small things. So these are good to know, just to get them in your head. Department of Justice, American stuff. What is a cartel? So even though you might know generally what a cartel is, you want to know the details of them, because multiple choice questions can ask you to elaborate on them. So it's kind of good to know these things.